The Hebridean Islands in the north of Britain are no strangers to heaven-sent revival. Yet by 1949, the spiritual tide was low and many hearts had grown cold and indifferent to the gospel. Once again, people began to seek the Lord for another outpouring of His Spirit, and in answer to prayer, revival began to spread to many areas. During these days of the outpouring of God's Spirit, it was evident that the Holy Spirit Himself was the divine leader and guide to where the revival would spread and break out in other areas. One such event which proved this took place on a small island in 1952. The servants of the Lord on the island of Bernera were deeply burdened by the state of the church and the lack of genuine worship. Their burden became so heavy that they began to get on their faces before the Lord, crying out, "Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains might tremble at your presence." One man who had been seeking the Lord would often pray in a small building in which he would get on his face amongst the straw and seek God. During this time, he was strangely moved and felt that their prayers had been answered. During his time in the Lord's presence, he felt that God was going to send Duncan Campbell, the revivalist who had seen revival many times before in the Hebrides. However, this praying man had no way to contact Duncan Campbell in the natural, so he prayed, "Lord, I don't know where he is, but you know, and with you all things are possible. You send him to the island." At the same time, Duncan Campbell was in Northern Ireland speaking at a conference. Yet the Holy Spirit impressed on him the need to travel to the island of Bernera immediately. Having no choice but to obey the voice of the Holy Spirit, and still sitting in the conference, he turned to the chairman and told him that the Lord was telling him to leave immediately. The chairman reminded Campbell that he had commitments here, but Duncan replied, "I'm sorry, I must obey the prompting of the Spirit and go at once." With that he left, and within a few days he was on the island that God had sent him to. Having never visited the island before, he knew no one and had nowhere to stay and nowhere to preach either. All that Duncan Campbell had was a prompting from the Holy Spirit which could not be denied. And he soon discovered, to his surprise, that not only was he expected, but the accommodation was ready and a mission was starting that evening at which he was expected to preach. The Holy Spirit had planned everything beforehand, and yet the first few days of ministry were nothing special. But after all the miraculous events which had led to his arrival, there was an expectation that God would visit them. And they began to pray from Psalm 50, "Our God shall surely come." One evening, as the people began to make their way home, the Holy Spirit visited the community. His presence was so real that the people could not go on any further. God had come amongst them, and as Jacob of old said, surely the Lord is in this place. Soon the people began to sigh and groan, as people were burdened by the weight of his presence. During the time of this visitation, the entire island found a new awareness of God. He was there. He was present. Many lives were transformed, and many were saved at the coming of his glory.